The road to Junee stretched endlessly, the landscape shifting from golden fields to barren patches of earth where shadows seemed to linger unnaturally long. The traveler had heard the stories whispered for years, Australia's most haunted house. They called it Monte Cristo Homestead, perched on its lonely hill like a sentinel of death, watching the small town below with eyes of glass and stone. Some called it cursed, others simply unlucky. But for those who dared cross its threshold, few left unchanged. By late afternoon, the sun bled across the horizon, staining the sky with crimson streaks. The silhouette of the homestead emerged in the distance, its sharp rooflines piercing the fading light. The Rotayan gates creaked when pushed, their rust groaning like a warning too old to heed. A long gravel path led upward, winding toward the mansion, every step crunching like bones beneath the traveler's boots. The house loomed larger with every pace. Its Victorian architecture, once a testament to wealth and pride, had decayed into something grim and menacing. Red bricks, darkened with age, seemed to drink in the last light of day. Windows glimmered faintly, though no lamps burned within, giving the impression that unseen eyes followed every movement. Curtains shifted ever so slightly, as if drawn back by a hand that should not exist. A flock of crows scattered from the roof as the traveler approached the front steps, their cries slicing through the thickening air. The grand veranda, once adorned with elegance, now sagged under the weight of time. Dust coated the intricate ironwork railings, and the wooden boards creaked, betraying years of neglect. The heavy front door bore scratches that ran deep into the wood, like desperate fingernails clawing for escape. The brass handle, tarnished and cold, waited. The traveler's hand trembled as they reached for it, every instinct screaming to turn back. Yet curiosity, a darker kind, mingled with obsession, drove them forward. For a moment, standing on the threshold, the traveler thought they heard something from within, a faint whisper, indistinct but urgent, slipping through the cracks of the door. They leaned closer, breath shallow, and felt a rush of icy air brush against their cheek. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the hill into twilight. The house stood in silhouette, massive and brooding, its windows glowing faintly as if lit from within by something not of this world. With a single push, the door groaned open. Darkness swallowed the traveler whole, and Monte Cristo Homestead welcomed its newest guest. Before the traveler ever set foot inside Monte Cristo Homestead, they had already been warned. The people of Junee carried the mansion's name like a curse on their tongues, uttered quietly in pubs and shops, never in full daylight, never without glancing over their shoulders. To them, the homestead was not just a relic of history, was a wound, festering and alive. At the local inn, an old man nursed a pint of beer with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he spoke of Christopher Crawley, the wealthy landowner who built the estate in the late 1800s. He died too soon. The old man muttered, his eyes clouding over, left his wife to rule over the house. She was never the same after. Others in the bar shifted uneasily, urging him to hush, but the words hung heavy, refusing to be silenced. They spoke of Elizabeth Crawley, the so-called lady of the house, widowed and embittered. She locked herself away in black mourning clothes for decades, her grief curdling into cruelty. Servants whispered of her iron fist, how she punished staff harshly, how children were forbidden to laugh, how the walls of Monte Cristo grew colder under her reign. Some said she believed the house was hers even in death, that she vowed never to leave. Then came the darker tales. A stable boy burned alive, his screams echoing through the halls long after the flames were gone. A maid who plummeted from the balcony under mysterious circumstances. A young child, locked away for years, driven to madness by solitude until his shrieks rattled the very windows. That the locals claimed that each death left an imprint, a scar that could never heal. Doors slamming when no one was near, footsteps pacing empty corridors, the sensation of icy fingers brushing your skin when the room was empty, and always the lady herself, appearing at the top of the stairs, her hollow eyes fixed on anyone foolish enough to look up. One woman in town leaned close to the traveler, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just ghosts," she said. "It's the house, the walls, the floors, the air you breathe. It remembers. It feeds on sorrow. Once you're inside, it won't let you go." The traveler tried to laugh it off, tried to dismiss the warnings as superstition, but deep down, a seed of dread had taken root, and when the gates of Monte Cristo creaked shut behind them, those whispers followed. lingering in their ears like the echo of a prayer turned into a curse. The first night inside Monte Cristo Homestead settled over the traveler like a suffocating blanket. As dusk deepened into night, the air within the mansion grew unnaturally still. The silence wasn't ordinary, no distant hum of insects, no sigh of wind against the windows. It was absolute, as though the world outside had been shut out entirely. Only the house remained, vast and waiting. The traveler lit a lantern, its glow casting long trembling shadows across the faded wallpaper. Dust shimmered in the air, disturbed by each careful step. The furniture, draped in white cloth, stood like silent mourners gathered for a funeral that never ended. Even the air smelled of aged alewood, dust, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. At first, the traveler tried to laugh at their own unease. They told themselves it was nothing more than the tricks of an old building settling after a long day of heat. But the house didn't creak like other houses. Its noises carried intention. A groan in the hallway lingered too long, like a sigh drawn from lungs that hadn't breathed in a century. A soft thud overhead mimicked footsteps pacing slow, deliberate before fading into silence. The staircase was the worst. Every time the traveler passed the landing, they felt compelled to glance upward. The shadows above seemed thicker, clinging to the banister, and though no one was there, the sense of being watched grew stronger with every hour. Once, they swore they heard the faint swish of fabric, the unmistakable sound of a long skirt dragging across the floor. By midnight, the air had turned icy. The lantern flickered, its flame shrinking against the encroaching dark. The traveler pulled their coat tighter, but couldn't shake the feeling that the cold wasn't natural. It felt localized, creeping only into the places where the shadows thickened most. Then came the whispers. At first, just faint murmurs, as though voices carried from another room. The traveler pressed their ear against the wall, straining to listen, but the words were muffled, impossible to understand. Still, the tone was unmistakable anguish, pleading, sorrow, a chorus of lost voices bleeding through the very walls, unable to bear the silence any longer. The traveler tried to sleep in one of the old bedrooms, but the bed was hard and unwelcoming, the sheets brittle with age. As they lay, their eyes open wide in the dark, the whispers grew louder. Then, from somewhere deep within the mansion, a door slammed shut with such force it rattled the windows. The traveler jolted upright, heart hammering, every nerve screaming, but the house remained silent again, as if mocking their terror. And that was when the realization sank in. The homestead wasn't empty. It never had been. The traveler had simply taken their place among its restless inhabitants. The following morning, the traveler explored the house in daylight, hoping the warm glow of the sun might strip away the night's terrors. It didn't. Even beneath the light, Monte Cristo Homestead clung to its darkness. Certain rooms seemed to resist illumination altogether, the windows clouded with grime, the walls drinking in every ray of light, as if the house itself despised being exposed. One room in particular drew the traveler's attention. Tucked away at the far end of a narrow hallway, behind a door with a rusted handle, was one of the old servant quarters. The locals had warned of this place, saying strange sounds were often heard within, though the room had been sealed for decades. The traveler hesitated, hand trembling on the knob, before forcing it open. The air that rushed out was heavy and sour. It smelled of mildew, of damp wood, but beneath it lingered a far more repulsive stench, rot, thick and choking, as if something had died within and never been removed. The traveler gagged, covering their nose, but curiosity pressed them inside. The room was small, the ceiling low, the walls scarred with deep grooves. At first, they looked like cracks in the plaster, but on closer inspection, the traveler saw they were claw marks, dozens of them, crisscrossing the walls, etched into wood and stone alike. The thought struck like ice. Someone had tried to escape. Someone had been trapped in here. The air grew colder with every step. The traveler's breath fogged faintly, their skin prickling with goo. As they ran a hand across the grooves in the wall, they felt a sudden rush of icy air sweep across their arm. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't natural. It felt like a cold, skeletal, gripping their skin for the briefest moment before vanishing. The lantern in their other hand flickered violently, its flame shrinking as the temperature plummeted. Shadows writhed in the corners of the room, stretching upward as though trying to claw their way free. A faint sound broke through the silence then, a whisper, low and guttural, rising from the very walls. The traveler couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of agony. The urge to flee was overwhelming. They stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the threshold, as the door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous crack. The impact rattled the floorboards, sending dust raining down from the ceiling. For several long seconds, the travelers stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the closed door, chest heaving, every nerve screaming. The cold lingered on their arm where the unseen hand had touched them, an imprint that seemed to sink beneath the skin. It was no longer just whispers, no longer just shadows. The house had touched them. Monte Cristo Homestead was no longer content to observe. It had begun to claim. After the encounter in the servants' room, the traveler tried to avoid that part of the house, but avoidance was futile. Monte Cristo Homestead didn't let its guests choose. It decided what they would see, what they would hear, what they would endure, and soon it began to show its memories. It started subtly, like whispers carried on the wind. While wandering through the grand hallway, the traveler heard the faint clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, though the stables outside had long since fallen silent. In the dining room, they caught the fleeting scent of roasted meat and wood smoke, mingling with the sharper, metallic temps of blood. For a brief moment, the long oak table looked whole, polished, laden with food. Then, in a blink, the illusion rotted into dust and cobwebs. That night, the visions grew stronger. As the traveler stood on the staircase, a sudden scream pierced the silence. The sound was sharp, desperate, human. It echoed through the halls, and before their eyes, a phantom figure appeared, a man tumbling violently down the stairs, his skull cracking against the floor below. The traveler stumbled back in horror, but the apparition dissolved into nothing, leaving only silence and the faint shimmer of blood that was never there. In the nursery, the air grew suffocating. The travelers swore they heard the high-pitched wail of a child crying, muffled by walls too thick. The sound rattled their bones, filled them with dread, until they couldn't stand it anymore. But when they turned to leave, the door refused to open. Their hands shook on the knob, the cries growing louder, more desperate, until just as suddenly, they stopped. Dead silence. The house wasn't finished. In the stables, the traveler's lantern flickered to reveal blackened stains on the floorboards. The acrid stench of charred flesh filled their lungs. And then came the sound, the guttural, horrifying shrieks of a boy consumed by flames. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance with fire, the heat licking the traveler's face, though no fire burned. When they blinked, it was gone. The stable stood cold and empty. Each vision was more violent than the last, not random, but deliberate. Monte Cristo was forcing the traveler to bear witness. Every death, every torment that had ever unfolded within its walls bled back into existence, replayed endlessly, etched into the house's very bones. By dawn, the traveler collapsed in the hallway, their body weak, their mind fractured by what they had seen. They understood now that the house wasn't haunted in the way people imagined. It wasn't just inhabited by ghosts. It was alive with suffering, and it wanted them to feel every ounce of it. By the sixth night, exhaustion had worn the traveler thin. Their body ached, their eyes burned from lack of sleep, and every breath felt heavier within Monte Cristo's suffocating air. But even in their weakest moments, the house would not relent. It was preparing them for something. For her, it began on the staircase landing, the place where every whisper of legend said she lingered. The traveler had passed it many times before, always avoiding looking too long into the shadows above. But this night, the shadows seemed different. They stretched too far, bending unnaturally, as if they were alive. The temperature dropped sharply, biting against skin and sinking deep into bone. The lantern's flame shrank, fighting to survive. And then, from the darkness at the top of the stairs, came the sound of fabric dragging against wood. A slow, steady swish, like the hem of a heavy gown. The traveler froze. Every nerve screamed for them to run, but their feet remained planted, their gaze drawn upward against their will. And there she was, Elizabeth Crawley. The lady of the house stood on the landing, shrouded in eternal mourning black. Her gown was high-necked, severe, draping to the floor, the fabric shifting as though carried by a wind that did not exist. Her face was pale, bloodless, yet unmistakably human until the traveler met her eyes. They were hollow, empty sockets burning with a dim, unnatural glow, bottomless pits of grief and rage. She didn't walk down the stairs. She glided. The sound of her gown scraping would echoed like thunder in the silence, though her feet never touched the steps. The traveler clutched the railing, unable to look away, unable to move, their chest constricted, as though the air itself bent to her will. When she reached the midpoint of the staircase, she stopped, her head tilted slowly, her gaze piercing through flesh, through bone, as though dissecting the traveler's very soul. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, she spoke, "You should not be here." The words rattled the walls, vibrating inside the traveler's skull until their ears rang. The phrase repeated, again and again, overlapping, building into a chorus. "You should not be here. You should not be here." Each repetition pressed heavier against the traveler's chest. Their knees buckled, breaths shallow, as if the house itself sought to crush them. Tears welled unbidden as their vision blurred, their minds screaming for release. And then silence. When the traveler blinked, she was gone. The staircase lay empty once more, bathed only in the weak glow of the lantern. Yet the weight of her presence lingered, clinging to the air, to the traveler's skin, to the walls themselves. They collapsed to the floor, trembling violently, the echo of her words still ringing in their ears. It hadn't been a warning, it had been a sentence. By now, the traveler had learned that Monte Cristo Homestead was more than stone and timber. It was a vessel, a container of grief, violence, and despair that refused to release its victims. Every hallway carried echoes, every room bore scars, and some objects seemed to thrum with their own cursed energy. None more so than the mirror. It hung in the grand bedroom, above a cracked dresser coated in dust. Its gilt frame was ornate, though tarnished, the gold long since dulled to a sickly bronze. The glass itself was fractured, running with jagged veins that warped reflections into grotesque shapes. The traveler had passed the room before, always hurrying, for the mirror had a reputation. It was said that those who stared too long into it never saw only themselves, they saw who else the house had claimed. But that night, drawn by an unseen force, the traveler stepped inside. The lantern flame sputtered as they approached, throwing nervous shadows across the floorboards. Their reflection stared back pale, exhausted, yet almost immediately, they noticed it. The reflection wasn't alone. Behind their image, other faces pressed against the glass. At first, they seemed faint, little more than smudges in the silvered surface. But as the traveler leaned closer, the figures sharpened. Dozens of them, men, women, children, crowded behind their reflection, their faces twisted in anguish. Some mouths were open in eternal screams, their teeth bared. Others pressed skeletal hands against the glass, as if begging to be freed. Their eyes were the worst, hollow sockets that still managed to burn with suffering. The traveler staggered back, their heart pounding, but the faces moved with them. They didn't stay still, they followed. One child's face emerged clearer than the rest, a boy with sunken cheeks and eyes wide with terror. He raised his hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. To the traveler's horror, the surface rippled, warping like water. A cold pressure pressed against their chest, and they realized the boy wasn't just reaching out, he was trying to pull them in. The traveler's breath caught in their throat. They stumbled backward, but the mirror shimmered violently, the figures pressing harder, their silent screams growing louder inside the traveler's skull. The glass bulged outward, as though the souls within were about to burst free. Then, just as suddenly, the lantern extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room whole. In that black silence, the traveler felt icy fingers brush their back. A breath whispered against their ear, though no one stood behind them. And in that voice, layered, broken, dozens speaking at once, they heard, "Join us." The traveler screamed, fumbling blindly for the door. When they finally stumbled into the hallway and relit the lantern, the bedroom lay silent once more. The mirror reflected only an empty room. No faces, no hands, nothing but a fractured reflection. And yet, the traveler couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them out, that the mirror hadn't been showing them the past, it had been showing them the future. The night after the mirror, the traveler knew something inside them had changed. They felt it the moment they awoke, the heaviness in their chest, the unfamiliar chill in their veins, the way their thoughts didn't feel entirely their own anymore. It was as though the house had seeped into them, crawling beneath their skin like a sickness. At first, it was subtle, a sudden wave of anger over nothing, a sharp bitterness that wasn't theirs. As they walked through the hallway, they caught themselves muttering under their breath, words they didn't understand, syllables twisted and foreign. The sound startled them, because the voice that spilled from their mouth wasn't their own, it was lower, raspier, ancient. The traveler's reflection confirmed their fears. In the cracked mirror above the fireplace, their face seemed different. The shadows clung too tightly beneath their eyes. Their lips curved into a grin they hadn't made, and for a split second, Another face overlapped their own, a pale, hollow-eyed visage that watched with cruel amusement. By nightfall, the influence grew stronger. The travelers' limbs felt heavy, as though strings pulled them in directions they didn't choose. Their hand would linger too long on doorknobs. Their feet would wander toward rooms they swore they meant to avoid. At one point, they found themselves standing before the staircase, landing without memory of climbing the steps, their lips whispering softly, "You should not be here." The very words the lady of the house had spoken. Then came the rage. In the dining room, the travelers' lanterns sputtered out. They slammed their fist on the table, shouting in fury, the sound echoing through the mansion like a command. But the fury wasn't theirs. It surged through their veins like fire, overwhelming, intoxicating. For a terrible moment, they felt powerful, like the master of the house, like Elizabeth herself. Their vision blurred, and in the flicker of a shadow, they saw themselves draped in black mourning clothes, their hands pale and skeletal. They stumbled back, gasping, clutching their head. The whispers inside the walls grew louder now, overlapping, chanting in unison, as if cheering the invasion of their body. The traveler collapsed to their knees, tears spilling as their chest heaved. They tried to scream no, but what came out was a hollow, guttural laugh. For the rest of the night, they fought it. They clutched their lantern, their eyes wild, pacing the halls like a prisoner trapped within their own skin. Every shadow seemed to tug at them. Every corner whispered promises of release, if they would just let go. By dawn, their body was their own, again, but only barely. Their hands trembled. Their throat burned raw from whispering words they didn't remember. Speaking. Monte Cristo Homestead wasn't just haunting them anymore, it was entering them. The days and nights blurred into one another, until time itself seemed meaningless. Within the walls of Monte Cristo Homestead, the traveler no longer knew how long they had been inside. Hours felt like days, days like weeks. The mansion fed on their exhaustion, their fear, their very sense of reality. And then, as though the house had grown impatient, it erupted. It began with the knocking, always 3 knocks, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the hallway like a judge's gavel. But this time, the sound didn't stop. It multiplied. The knocks became pounding, slamming, reverberating through every wall, every floor, until the entire house shook violently. Plaster cracked, dust rained from the ceiling, and picture frames crashed to the floor. The traveler staggered to their feet, clutching their head as the cacophony rose. The whispers joined next, no longer faint but booming, layered voices screaming, crying, pleading, laughing. It was as if every soul trapped in the homestead spoke at once, their anguish merging into a single, deafening roar. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the windows, crystallizing into jagged veins that spidered across the glass. Their breath fogged in the air, white and frantic, as the lantern sputtered and died, leaving them in total darkness. But darkness didn't mean emptiness. No, shadows writhed in every corner, growing taller, stretching, merging into grotesque shapes that crowded closer with every heartbeat. Doors slammed one after another, like a chain reaction of fury, until the house seemed to pulse with anger. The traveler stumbled into the grand hallway, only to see the chandelier above sway violently, its chains creaking, before it came crashing down. Shards of glass exploded across the floor, narrowly missing them as they fell to their knees, ears ringing from the impact. And then came the vision. The hallway bled with history, a maid falling from the balcony, her scream cut short as her skull cracked against stone, a boy thrashing as flames devoured him, servants clawing at locked doors until their fingernails split and bled, each vision layered over the next, until the traveler could no longer tell where the past ended and the present began. Blood soaked the floorboards, faces screamed inches from their own. Every inch of Monte Cristo demanded their suffering. The traveler pressed their palms to their ears, sobbing, begging it to stop. But the house didn't want mercy. It wanted surrender. And in that chaos, they felt it again, the presence inside them. It surged forward, stronger than before, filling their chest, twisting their thoughts. Their own voice cried out in agony, but layered beneath it was another, colder, more commanding. For the first time, the traveler understood the truth. The homestead wasn't replaying its tragedies. It was recruiting. It wanted them to become part of the endless cycle. Another ghost in its collection. The walls rattled one final time, and then, without warning, silence fell. The traveler collapsed onto the cold floor, their body trembling, drenched in sweat, their sanity splintering at the edges. They lay there gasping in the dark, staring at the ceiling. waiting for the next wave. But the house had gone quiet, too quiet, as though it was smiling. When dawn finally broke, the traveler rose from the floor of the grand hallway with trembling limbs. Pale light filtered through the cracked windows, casting long beams across the dust-choked air. It should have been a relief, the promise of safety in daylight, but the house felt no less oppressive. The silence that now filled Monte Cristo wasn't peace, it was restraint, like a predator crouching low, letting its prey think it had a chance to run. The travelers staggered toward the front door, clutching their half-packed bag, each step heavier than the last. Their breath came ragged, their mind fractured from the night's horrors. The images of burning children, screaming maids, and Elizabeth Crawley's hollow eyes still flickered across their vision, imprinted into their skull like scars. They whispered to themselves, desperate, delirious, "Just get out, just get out." The heavy front door loomed ahead, its brass handle glinting faintly in the pale light. They reached for it with trembling fingers, praying it would turn, praying the nightmare would end. To their relief, the door creaked open. A flood of cold morning air rushed in, stinging their lungs but carrying with it the taste of freedom. They stumbled down the veranda steps, onto the gravel path. The iron gates waited at the bottom of the hill, and beyond them lay Junee, ordinary and alive. Birds chirped faintly in the distance. The travelers' legs carried them forward, each crunch of gravel beneath their boots louder than their pounding heart. But when they reached the gates, something made them stop. Against their will, they turned back. The mansion stood on its hill, looming in the golden morning light. From this distance, it no longer looked decayed. It looked alive. Its windows reflected the rising sun in such a way that they glowed, almost like eyes, almost like they were watching. And in that glow, the traveler thought they saw movement shadows pacing the rooms, curtains twitching and then, for the briefest moment, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. A woman in black, Elizabeth Crawley. She stood still, her form sharp against the morning light, her hollow gaze fixed directly on them. The traveler's breath caught in their throat. They blinked, and she was gone. The house stood empty once more, silent and smug. They forced themselves through the gates, down the road, back toward the living. Yet even as the town came into view, the feeling didn't fade. The weight of Monte Cristo clung to their skin, seeped into their thoughts, whispered through their bones. That night, when they closed their eyes in a stranger's bed, they dreamed of the house. They dreamed of the mirror, of the shadows pressing closer, of Elizabeth Crawley's voice hissing in their ear, "You should not be here." And when they awoke in the dark, heart pounding, they swore they heard it again. 3 knocks, steady and deliberate. The house hadn't let them go. It never would.